I must admit that some topics to present are easy and some are hard, and probably the closer they are to home, the harder they are. That's conflict resolution. Yeah. Matthew 18. I can remember, something like this. Pastor, I'm really confused. In fact, I'm hurt, I'm angry. I think following Jesus' counsel in the Bible was the chief cause of my problem. You go, oh, okay. How come? Well, Mrs. X, looked at me the way she does. Very insulting, and muttered a real put down as I was taking Sabbath School. So I decided to follow Jesus' advice in Matthew 18. So I went up to her, told her that look and her muttering was an insult and hurtful, and the Bible tells us if someone sins against us to go privately and confront them. If they repent, that's good, but if they don't, then we'll take them before the church elders. Before I could even finish, she gave me that look, turned away, walked away, and her and her family don't talk to me anymore right now, and she gives me that look. Well, yeah, that's made up. But it sort of sums up the essence of what has been said to me probably too many times in my ministry. Is Jesus' advice in Matthew 18 God's sledgehammer for you to use to win in your conflict with another? And as you know, we started last week looking at this issue of conflict resolution, and probably the reason that motivated this was an article I read recently that came from the Grant study. 85 years of studying people. Started with 400 at Harvard in 1935. They added a little bit later another 400 from an inner city underprivileged area. Actually, one of the people in the original study was John F. Kennedy. So, they asked them all sorts of questions, had their IQ, what they ate and family, and it went on, it's gone on, turned into almost 1,000 studied over this massive amount of time. Then their wives and their children and everything else. Interested, studying people and in-depth studying people, their health, their IQ, their background, how much money they had and everything else. And this is what they found. Surprise, surprise. There is a strong relationship, found strong relationships to be far the strongest predicator of life satisfaction. The best predicators of long and healthy lives than social class, wealth, fame, IQ, and even genes. That finding proved true across the board of both the Harvard men and the inner city participants. The strong relationships are not only correlated with happiness, but physical health, longevity, and financial success. Wow. Okay. And what does Jesus tell us? By this all men will know that you're my disciples, by what? The strong relationships you have to one another. That's what he's saying, isn't he? And he even says, love your neighbour as yourself. Now, we've talked about how this word is agape, treating them as you'd want to be treated, not wanting to go up and hug everyone. So, but the reality is, and God realises and Jesus realises, that any good relationship is based on what? resolving conflict. It's the reality of living in a sinful world, isn't it? If someone comes to me in pre-marriage counselling and says, "Oh, we're so in love, we've never had a fight," I feel like saying, well, go away and have a fight and then come back and you might be ready to get married. Because while you think love is about never having a fight, you don't know what life's about. And that's the reality, isn't it? Relationships and conflict management is one of the keys, and the keys that Jesus points out in having good relationships. Conflict is really just finding those rub points that need working on in a relationship. So, yeah, we looked at 9 points last week. Expect it. Yeah, realise the hurtness of others. One of the things that helps me a lot, if you could read the secret history of your enemy, find enough person's life, sorrow and suffering, enough to disarm any hostility. Don't lose your cool. Proverbs, a gentle answer turns away anger. Don't add fuel to the fire. Overlook offence. You know, sometimes, as Proverbs says, a person with a good sense is patient. To their credit, they overlook an offence. Be willing to admit your mistakes. Pray for a person. It's hard to be mad at someone if you're praying for them. And then finally, we looked at showering kindness. Then I promised to look at Matthew chapter 18, which is, you know, in essence, Matthew 18, at its heart, what I came to realise is don't gossip. Don't gossip. You know, what's gossip? Casual, unconstrained conversation or reports about the other person, typically involving details that are not confirmed as being true. As James says, wow, control your tongue. If you can't control your tongue. In fact, the Bible tells us that the slanderers are not going to be in the kingdom. But it's a challenge, isn't it? When I took a year after, went backpacking, the modern term would be backpacking, and I went to England and had a year off working over there as a volunteer from my uni. We were in Cairo, and my friend was driving, and the Egyptian young fellow beside him was saying, "You go this way and you go that way." And then he said to him, "Now turn up here to the right." My friend started turning and then whacked on the brakes, and "What's the problem? Keep going." He says, "But it's a one-way street, you know, and it's the wrong direction and you're telling me to go." And the young guy looked at him and said, "Have faith, brother, have faith." You know, sometimes, I'm not recommending going up one-way streets the wrong way, but in our society, we've got a overwhelming way of dealing with conflict is through gossip and innuendo and trying to build up everyone on your side, etc., etc. And it takes courage to go in a different direction, doesn't it? Otherwise, what happens in our society, on that same year I had off, I was in Thailand, and there was a 6-lane highway, and there was there was a train, and there was a big train going across, and it was an awfully long train, and people came along, and it was jammed up way back, and some thought, oh, well, maybe it's so free on this side, and so they went over this side, and I was sitting in this bus, I couldn't believe it. When the train finally got through, there were 6 lanes of traffic looking at one another. Unbelievable. Absolute jam. And that's so often in our society when uncontrolled gossip. We try to build up those on our side. You know, oh, have you heard? I'm wondering if you could give me some advice on how to deal with, you know, have you noticed that so-and-so seems to, etc., etc. And what happens? We end up with this terrible logjam. And that's so often how our society, you know, Matthew 18 was very simple. Keep it between you and the individual. Don't try and build up supporters on your side. Yeah, many relationships are destroyed and communities fractured because a few people chose to talk to everyone but the person who offended them. Gossip's one of Satan's main things to try and destroy good relationships, trying to destroy your own health and the health of your church, the health of those around us. Yep, I like what Mrs. White says. To love as Christ loved means to manifest unselfishness at all times and all places by kind words and pleasant looks. These cost those who give them nothing, but they leave behind a fragrance that surrounds the soul. Their effect can never be estimated. Not only are they a blessing to the receiver, but to the giver, for they react upon him. Genuine love is a precious attribute of heavenly origin, which increases in fragrance and in proportion as it's dispensed to others. Yeah, as I thought about that, I realised that when we approach Matthew 18, I've got to approach it with this sort of an attitude. Okay? If you think, oh, look here, there's a text in the Bible that says, if someone sins against me, I can go and tell them off. And if they don't agree with me, I can drag some elders along to support me, and then I'll take them to the whole church. It's just not quite what is being suggested here, is it? And what I realised, I was going to talk on Matthew 18, and I started to realise that there are other texts that Jesus gave on this same topic about how to deal with conflict with those who are close to you. And what I came to realise is that those texts help set and must be worked in with Matthew 18 if we are going to be healthy. So you're going to hear about those texts today, and Matthew 18 will be next week. Let's have a look at those. Matthew 5 is the one we read out. So, if you're offering a gift, it's just talked about, you know, if you've been angry with your brother, or if you get, you know, upset with someone, or say raka or whatever to them. And then it says, now if you remember any of those times that you've been angry or you've upset someone, you're going to give a gift, leave it and go to the altar and be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. What is Jesus saying here? Jesus is saying, if you've done something to upset, then you initiate by saying sorry. In other words, you're 90% of the problem. I tell you, this is so important to initiate something, to initiate it with an attitude of asking for forgiveness. Then the second one is taking the initiative. I have been involved with, one stage I became a trained mediator. And in dealing with conflict, they sort of gave 5 levels. And they said the first level of conflict is, just a very low level. Oh, yeah, that's a bit of an upset and a slight, problem. By the time you get to level 5, that's divorce. That's sort of, not kill one another, but almost. And I say the big issue is that level 1 and 2, people can sort out, couples can sort it out themselves. 3 and 4 levels, that's getting a lot heavier, and and if you go and involved with mediation, if couples come to you or people come and wanted something mediated, and it's only at level 3 or 4, you've got a chance of being able to work it through. But by the time it gets to level 5, when they're starting to get out the knives and there's not much that can be done. But have a guess when most people come along to get help in mediation. That's right. Most people try and sort out a problem when they've ignored it, pushed it under the carpet, whatever they do with it, and it's got right up there where they're wanting to get knives, and it's usually, come along, I want someone to mediate and tell you how, So what's being suggested here? This is, in Matthew, this is a guy, this is a man or a woman, you're praying, you're giving a gift, you're helping out. God wants you to say, oh, okay, yeah, I did have a bit of an issue with someone in the church, but how about someone in your own family? Your wife, your husband, your son, your daughter, your mum, your dad. So it's in the incidents of everyday life. When you think and remember that you could have hurt someone, go and take the initiative. And what that means, it's most likely only be a level 1 or level 2 problem if you deal with it then and not let it fester and keep going. But too often, we sort of decide on the good old silent treatment. I'm going to wait for that person that's wronged me to apologise. Or the flip side is, I've done something wrong and, maybe I'll just wait for the person to, mention something and that'll, Yeah, Jesus teaches the opposite. Taking initiative. Otherwise, it can leave Satan to plant a root of bitterness and destroy unity. It just festers. Then there's this Luke 6 and verse 41 and 42. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, take the speck out of your eye when you yourself fail to see the plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your eye and then you will see clearly to move the speck from your brother's eye. From my marriage counselling training, and I suppose when I looked at this text, if you apply and say, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your wife's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. Take the plank out of your own eye and then you can see clearly to remove the speck from your husband's eye. It's getting a bit close to home. Why don't you just keep it on brothers and sisters and people in the church or people at work or whatever? But I must admit, in marriage counselling, if a husband comes along to talk about a problem and he says, oh, look, we've got some real conflict going on here and I realise that I'm 80% of the problem, can you help us sort it out? You think, wow, yes! 90% of my counselling work has been done. Why? What was that little word that the husband said? I got a problem and I realised that 80% of the problem's me and we need help sorting it out. I'd like to say that's happened in marriage counselling, but, normally come along and, yeah, we're here to sort out, got a problem, my wife's got a problem, she just won't. Yeah. Well, you should know my wife's all the problem in our conflict, but anyway, don't tell her. Yes, what a sad thing, isn't it? It's how we so often are as human beings. Right in the Garden of Eden we're told about, isn't it? How told you were naked? Oh, that woman you gave me. Oh, that serpent. No, we don't have problems. As you know, I don't have a problem. If you have a problem with me, it's your problem, not my problem. Yeah. I remember I worked as a volunteer. My wife actually worked there. A remand centre in, I don't know whether in Victoria they have it, but in New South Wales, if you've offended in some way, something that should normally send you to jail, they have these remand centres or attendance centres where you go along and there was counselling, group counselling, and you have to... So I was one of the group counsellors there at one of the remand centres, and I worked with group, there was violent offenders and there was drug and alcohol abuse offenders as well. And we had 10 weeks, once a week, 3 hours, once a week for 10 weeks. And you know what was our job in that our core goal in that 10 weeks, 30 hours of counselling, group counselling, to try and help them see they've got a problem. Oh, my wife ought to know if I come home drunk at night and she looks at me, I'm going to bash her. Really? But it's easy to say, well, those poor, violent offenders, but what about us? How hard is it us to admit that we're 80% of the problem? And this is what Jesus is really pointing to. Notice Jesus isn't saying, except you've got the problem and just walk away from it. No, Jesus says, if you can work on the plank in your own eye, then you are in a position to actually help your brothers and sisters. We all need help. Jesus is not saying, in fact, the whole point of Matthew 18 is the fact that we need to interact and resolve and work through issues, not just ignore them and pretend they don't exist. Yeah. If you look at Luke 6, here's some pretty... Whenever we're upset by others, ask, what is it within me that causes me to be so outraged by them? Yeah. Whenever we are quick to assume we're holy and someone else is not, ask, what are some ways I sin in a similar fashion to how they're sinning? Yes, at school when I was a kid, one of my teachers used to say, life is a mirror. Whenever any of the kids were accusing someone else, life is a mirror. This is really what Jesus is saying. That's the challenge, isn't it? It's the challenge. Challenge of Luke. Life is a mirror. You see in it the reflection of your inner self. So here we have two texts that relate specifically to this issue of conflict management. And I think that I've come to realise that I needed to talk about them because they are obvious predicators to helping us understand and apply Matthew 18. And if you don't understand the concepts put forward by Jesus here and apply them when you are applying Matthew 18, the whole thing can fall off. The whole thing can fall off. So what have we learned? Key instructions for conflict. Of course, Matthew 18, and as I said, sorry about it, I did say I'd be dealing specifically with it this week, but it's going to be next week. But I suppose I'll give you a bit of a tip. No, not next week, next time I preach. Jesus says, if another believer sins against you, go privately and point the offence. If he listens to you, you've gained a brother. I'll give you one hint now. It says, if another believer sins against you. It doesn't say when another believer sins against you. There's a difference in your attitude, and we'll explore that a lot more next time. So if we follow the instructions Jesus gives in conflict resolution, Matthew 5 says, take an early initiative to put things right, approaching the issue with an attitude that's your problem, not theirs. Luke, approach conflict resolution that an attitude that it's 80% my problem. When you've sorted out your issues, then continue to help those close. And Matthew, of course, is stop gossiping. Notice that when you look at those three passages, healthy conflict management puts you right with God, wins a brother and a sister, and helps you better help those you are in close relationship with. Wow, that's the positive, isn't it? You know, we shouldn't run away from conflict. Conflict is God's way of helping us see there's some rub points that need to be sorted out, both in ourselves and in others. By this men all will know that you're my disciples, from your love for one another. And then I come back to that text, that quote from Mrs. White that I think sums up the whole issue that goes on here. The badge of Christianity is not an outward sign, not a wearing of a crown, or cross or a crown, but it is that which reveals the union of man with God. The strongest argument in favour of the gospel is a loving and lovable Christian. If we would humble ourselves before God, be kind and courteous, tender-hearted and pitiful, there will be 100 conversions to the truth, where now there's only one. And you'll live longer, you'll be happier, you'll be healthier, and you'll have better relationships. May God bless each one of us as we reflect on these challenges on how to be happy in life by having better relationships with everyone. May God bless you.
Test. Let's be upstanding for our final hymn.
The light in the
Dear Lord, it's strange that we will thank you for the conflict that's in our lives. Because as you have promised, when we face trials and difficulties, they're the grow points that help us grow. And we thank you that you are there to help us to look at ourselves and try and ask, what is this telling me about what's going on in my life? And then we are able to help and support others and ask the question, what is this saying about what's going on in this other person's life? And often, dear Lord, it's got nothing to do what the conflict is about. There's often deeper, more challenging things that we each struggle with that cause us to lash out to others. And I just ask that you'll help everyone here. We all have difficulties. The devil guarantees conflict and struggles. And we thank you that Jesus is there to help us and to be with us. And we want to claim that promise for Christ's sake. Amen.